Good morning.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Tom? So nice to be with you.
Same here, Congresswoman. It's good to see you, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
It's really a pleasure to kick off our first inaugural town hall with you. So it's good to see you. It's not the same as when we last met, but it'll do for now. So what I wanted to do was just give our audience a little bit of a brief bio about you, and then ask you to address a few issues that you see coming up, and then we'll do a little bit of a Q&A if that's okay.
Sounds great.
We've got a couple of individuals, Debbie Holton, our Managing Director of Industry Events, who you know is going to be up and ask a question. Also part of the 11th District, and we appreciate her. And
I know. Thank you for letting us keep Debbie.
she'll tell you a little bit about a great event that we just pulled off with the AM medical 3D printing. It was fantastic. We had originally we thought we'd have about 600 to 700 participants. We had several thousand. We did a virtual exhibition space, and more importantly, Congresswoman, we generated 9,300 sales leads for our vendors. So we're trying to figure out the same thing in terms of what we do with technology. I find myself, I was in New York for 3 weeks taking care of some business back and forth. I find myself now carrying 2 laptops and 2 iPads just because I'm paranoid about not being able to stay connected. So, yep, you got it. So for our audience, Congresswoman Haley Stevens sits on the House Committee on Education and Labor and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, where she also serves as the Chairwoman of Research and Technology Subcommittee. Before being elected to Congress, she served as the Chief of Staff to the U.S. Auto Rescue Task Force, the federal initiative responsible for saving General Motors, Chrysler, and most importantly, 200,000 Michigan jobs. Congratulations and thank you. She also played a key role in setting up the Office of Recovery for Automotive Communities and Workers and the White House Office of Manufacturing Policy. And after serving in the Obama administration, worked in Manufacturing Research Lab, focused on the future of work in the digital age. It's fantastic. And again, it's just purely an honor for me to sit here and continue both our professional relationship and our friendship. So for our attendees, we're going to ask Congresswoman Stevenson just to give us a little bit of an update from her perspective. And then we'll go into a Q&A. You can do that by raising your hand on the chat feature. And we'll have a few of our ASME staff answer the questions. So Congressman, without further delay, good morning and thank you again for joining us. Tell us a little bit of what you've been doing.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, and thanks to all of you for your great involvement and affiliation with ASME and an organization I have a lot of respect and admiration for, particularly in my role as subcommittee chair for research and technology on the House Science Committee, as well as on the Education and Labor Committee. And as someone, as Tom previously said before I got into Congress, as somebody who had the privilege of working with ASME. In a previous position, was able to recruit an ASME sponsored fellow into a research lab where I was working, and that experience was transformative, not only for our office and our work, but because we were a part of Manufacturing USA. We were a Manufacturing USA Institute, as a matter of fact, and we were charged with a pretty big portfolio, the workforce development and manufacturing engagement portfolio. And our ASME fellow enabled us to develop the job profiles and roles specific to digital manufacturing in partnership with Manpower Group and dozens of original equipment manufacturers and a handful of university partners. We helped create the country's first online certification in digital manufacturing through Coursera and our friends at the University at Buffalo and Lockheed Martin. And so I was, I pay attention to your communications, and in advance of getting together today, I was just poking around on your website, and it's just such a joy to see an organization that frankly does the work that all of you do, which is the certifications, the codes, and the standards. I helped to oversee the standards body, NIST on the science committee. And so we all know about the complexities and hardship of doing preeminent standards, but also just all the dedication and leadership that you all have always shown in the workforce development space, and how we can close our skills gap and prepare for the innovation economy of the future. And so I just wanted to say thank you and show my gratitude to all of you in advance of giving you my update, which has been, look, this has been a very interesting time to be in Congress. Sworn in on January 3rd, 2019, first term. And this term was full of a lot of different surprises, just things that you don't normally see in one session in Congress. I don't need to enumerate all of them, but you guys can all just look back on memory lane. One thing that I am proud of is our historic trade deal, that if you think of recent history, we renegotiated NAFTA for the USMCA, for the first time in 25 years. And that was done at the tail end of December. I remember being in the chamber for the President's State of the Union address, and you have the whole Congress, House and Senate, Supreme Court, the cabinet that's there, and we were starting to talk about COVID. And of course, for me, the first thing I thought of, just being in a manufacturing destination and being a manufacturing geek, is, okay, well, what are we going to do about that? So what does that mean for our supply chain? And I know we're going to get in the Q&A, so I don't need to give you all the top lines, but I will just say that this orientation, particularly around the supply chain, in addition to the health and safety, as this global pandemic hit our shores in less than a fiscal quarter, and really changed temporarily our way of life, forced us to really take up the medical needs, and making sure that everyone knew that everyone counts, and that it's all hands on deck, and that we're going to prioritize everyone's health and safety, just as we're going to continue to prioritize the economic safety, right? Because the two are inextricable for one another. So the region that I'm in, Tom, showcased, right, that our manufacturers can step up and meet an unprecedented industrial call to action, which was, and here I'm sitting in my, my kitchen where I am right now. We're slowly getting back. I do kind of a mix of the official and the political during the day. So this is the safest place ethically to work, but we're just still getting our office back up and running in Livonia, which is, by the way, a hub to great manufacturers. But from this very kitchen, I have continued to hold quasi hearings. I put them in air quotes, but quasi hearings on our supply chain needs, open source platforms, molecular metrology, and ways in which we can match DNA mapping to meet COVID needs for data storage. We've brought together research partners, organizational partners, and I've been able to see a lot of my colleagues from my kitchen. So I don't hold the gavel, but I run the meeting as if it's a hearing, and we get good questions in. We put out press releases. Transparency obviously is so important for all of us. And then the other thing is, you're all probably familiar with some of the big pieces of legislation that we've passed, but you might not know everything that's in the legislation. And we've continued to prioritize the manufacturing economy, $50 million for our manufacturing extension partnership centers, monies for one of our manufacturing USA institutes called Nimble, that focuses on biopharmaceutical manufacturing. I mean, the work, Tom, that we have all done together for so long, in many ways, you saw it manifesting in this moment. Oh, this is why in addition to the competitiveness strategy, right? But this is why we did this. And look, our heart breaks for, the students who had to be removed from their classrooms. I mean, trust me, it was like the cry heard around the world here when, the manufacturing for the automotive had to shut down in aerospace. Again, they started making that PPE. I was doing some of that matchmaking. I still have it on my website. If you want to make PPE, let's match you up together. And, it's been this real plight towards collaboration. So we're going to come back. The training tools are still there. I know you guys at ASME have been leaders in developing the online, and we want to thank you so much for that. And I'll stop now because I'm a big fan of all of yours. I know we have a lot to cover here today, and I just know that hour's going to zoom by. No pun intended. So.
Well, thank you. You know, the part that I asked you to do is be a little bit more passionate when you speak. Okay, it's just it's very comforting. But and you're right. We've got a couple of great initiatives that you know, literally right on a bunch of stuff that you've done. The ability of the automotive manufacturers to jump in to start producing respirators. I read a piece this Sunday in the paper that the average cost of a patient, 40% of the patients that are in New York City, the average cost for complete care is over $100,000. And it's the respirators that are making the big difference, and the ability for the automotive industry to turn a pivot, to use an overused word lately. And by the way, Congresswoman, I stopped pivoting. I'm now swiveling. I'm going to change that. But it's what engineers do. You know, unlike scientists, we like to build things, and then if we think it's easy, we make it much more difficult. But it's the funding and it's the support that really makes a difference as well. So what I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is jump into our Q&A portion. Our first question is going to come from a gentleman, Alex Marrero, who's part of the 11th District. He's an engineer with GM and a great contributor to ASME, and we thought we'd ask Alex to kick us off. So Alex, please.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, Congresswoman. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your engagement, if I saw Twitter correctly. So congratulations on that. So working at GM, I've had the privilege of working on our ventilator project, and now with this ramp up, and especially working with our supply chain, working in supplier quality. And one question I have for you is, what do you think can be done from a legislative standpoint to empower manufacturers to produce equipment and resources needed to more proactively try to meet future emergencies?
I muted myself to give a slight sneeze because it's that time of year. I've got to my left a big outdoors, and sometimes I keep my sliding glass door open. I think the pollen's flying in there, so pardon me for that. But Alex, thank you so much for that great question, and for your work at General Motors, and particularly on the ventilator project. It was one of the most inspiring things that this country has witnessed in manufacturing in such a long time. And we want to thank you and your colleagues and your team. So please do that for me, and know that all of us in Congress are cheering you on. I get asked about this by colleagues. We had 60 Minutes cover this, and it was just really inspiring to see. And particularly to your question, it brought together the supplier community in a way that we haven't seen in a while now. What do we say? Oh, how do we bring together supplier community? Well, hundreds of suppliers are always humming and producing and doing the on-time delivery to make the automobiles, particularly here in Michigan. I mean, this is something we know: complex supply chain systems, highly integrated, hundreds of thousands of jobs all at one time. The companies that we drive by, Alex, as we drive around our hometowns, right? On the I-75 corridor all the way down to 696 and into Western Wayne County. And it's just remarkable what these big facilities do in any given day, and what they stepped up to do to produce, particularly if you had the specs or if you didn't, or if you could kind of come together. Our OEs showing the might and the power of what an original equipment manufacturer could do. What we want to do, though, is recognize where we fell short. And I will say, and maybe this is just the time, and by the way, thank you for sharing my personal news, and Tom, that's okay that you didn't know that or make mention of it. It somehow hit the Michigan news and online and things like that, but that's great. But something else sort of personal here is that I was a freshman in college during 9/11 at American University, which is in Washington, D.C. And I've been a freshman in Congress during this pandemic. And sometime last year, it just, I'm co-president of the freshman class, and it just sort of dawned on me, we didn't really get the what if training. What if, Alex, we had a national emergency and it prevented Congress from doing its job? Or, how are the agencies prepared for a 9/11 moment? And obviously, right, 9/11 was a unique event. We never, ever, ever want to see that again. And we really oriented our government over a handful of years coming out of 9/11 to prevent something like that from happening again, and have really put forward a lot of efforts to combat terrorism on our shores. Sometimes we haven't been successful, but nothing like what we saw with 9/11. With this pandemic, it was always a known threat, but it was just not something we were always readying and preparing for outside of the agencies charged with dealing with it. Now, we do know that our manufacturing sector has long prepared itself for the industrial Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, the fourth revolution that has really been sweeping over the last over half a decade, almost a decade now, in a remarkable and expedient way, to the likes that this industry has almost never seen before. So as somebody who, before I was in Congress, was working in this space and really saw the opportunity of open source platforms and what they provide and do, we need to have those flexibility and stabilizers that kind of come into play. And what I mean by that is, with the stabilizers, it's sort of like a trigger, right? So the trigger comes in and it says, you know what, we're having a disruption in the supply chain. What's the need and how do we quickly reorient? And there is a article in Time magazine that hit, I think maybe right at the end of March, maybe beginning of April, around the supply chain going every which way with this pandemic. And like, who's I was kind of talking about how it felt like almost like a Rube Goldberg all of a sudden. It's like, wait a minute, this is our bread and butter. I mean, this is something we have long mastered. So I'm a big believer in the collaborative actions that can be taken and also what we can get from open source platforms. And I didn't drop the legislation, but I had a hearing, or one of my quasi hearings on this with the science committee around the opportunities for open source platforms. And originally when, we saw this problem, and GM is such a great example, Alex. You guys saw a problem, you stepped up to solve it. Nobody asked you to do it. You just knew you were the ones to do it. You inspired the nation by making those ventilators, by meeting a need, by addressing and allaying concerns and fears. I mean, I had those conversations with our mayors and our hospitals when they were running out of ventilators and this pandemic was hitting our shores. I mean, look, I've never gone to war, okay? And I would still say I haven't gone to war, but my goodness, I felt like my hair at certain points was gonna fall out just listening to what was going on in the community. And that lasted for a little bit, but then we quickly came together. So how do we say, from a federal standpoint, we're going to propagate and continue to proliferate responsibly with the right cybersecurity in play? We all know, ASME knows this real well, cybersecurity standards, cybersecurity workforce, but open source platforms that allow for that opportunity to meet the supply chain needs when it's triggered, when we're thrown off, when there's another event. Because we know about these pandemics, right? And we now know what they can do. And what they can inspire and what they can afford us in terms of relying on our industrial base. Climate change might be another one. A different crisis, a different kind of opportunity. And what you're talking about is going to fulfill, I think, hours of hearings and legislative action and orientation in our federal government. Part of where we are right now, and I'm going to close with this, Tom, because I know we've got other questions, but part of where we are as a country, right, is that we have done the great build of this nation. This is our parents, our grandparents, who Eisenhower. I mean, this wasn't that long ago when we built the national highway system. And yet we have become this incredible built environment. You can liaise and do business. Obviously now we're doing it over Zoom, but with our great airline industries and transportation abilities and connection abilities, faster, better together. And we have to realize right now that we're going to do some of the tough work of reorganizing, reimagining, and renovating. And that's also something that we're charged with. So thank you all so much. And thanks for that great question, Alex. I want to come see you.
Alex, thank you. And Congresswoman, thank you again. Our next question is from Debbie Holton, and as actually Debbie will address a few of the questions to our audience. Thank you for sending these in. Debbie, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? Hi, Haley.
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for all your work.
Yeah, so, Haley, thanks for being such a proponent of manufacturing for so long, even before your public life. Always good to have our manufacturing people together. One of the things that ASME has been working on, and Tom alluded to it earlier, is this idea of additive manufacturing and 3D printing for medical applications. It really does provide a life-changing opportunity for people in terms of what can be produced and what new innovations are happening. And we also saw, the importance of this technology in supplementing the medical supply chain for the COVID response. And people were kind of coming out of the woodwork. We also were facilitating an initiative with America Makes and the FDA and NIH. We were working with the folks at NCMS, really just trying to kind of help direct people in the right direction, because as you kind of alluded to, the supply chain was kind of all over the place. So how can we continue to kind of provide this structure that allows for more interagency collaboration, more like DOD and FDA, and where people are kind of talking to each other, and also to kind of unlock funding to continue to advance these technologies that are really so important. We've done so much since America Makes was created in 2012, but it feels like we could achieve so much more in so many different technologies. To your point about digital, so what do you see happening in the future?
Thank you so much for that, Debbie, and for just all of your work in the space that you're in. There's just a lot of different ways in which we can embrace digital applications in workforce training, and the cybersecurity landscape. Certainly, I see a lot of great potential with our Science, Space and Technology Committee, particularly around the investments in research and development. And I would also say that collaborative partnerships continue to be a very important component of these efforts. And the integrator organizations, obviously ASME is one of them. One of the things I've been kind of spending some time on even this morning, but just over the last couple of weeks with our schools and what it's going to look like to come back and what that means, because our schools are our pipelines in that space. And so when we think about how we're going to come back safely, what it meant to have the first robotics shuttered for this year. I know, and I want to hear the stories from all of you about how you've been able to utilize some of your online training tools to assist our educators, because when I think about ASME, I know you guys are in such a great spot to do that. And when we heard from Alex and about GM stepping up, I think about all of you guys too, stepping up to put up your hand. But I think this is also going to take some legislative action, Debbie, and we would absolutely welcome an opportunity to continue to hear not only from ASME as an organization, but all of your affiliates as well, to help us guide and kind of continue to put forward some of these solutions, not just because we have a problem. I don't like to define things in that way. I like to define things from what are our opportunities. And we've had a lot of opportunity. We've had, if you look at some of the actions we've been taking, within our science committee, it hasn't been partisan. I mean, it's really been, hey, what's going to propel our innovation sector forward, particularly also with legislation that we've done with Building Blocks of STEM Act, as well as other integrated approaches within the federal government. So thank you for that. I know there's more to dig on there too, and we also gotta tell the story of digital in a way that doesn't scare away our suppliers or some of the smaller companies. I would also include that in there as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you for your participation. So, Congresswoman, the next speaker is a dear friend. He's about to become one of our Board of Governors next week, Andy Bikos. He is also a former federal fellow and part of the airline industry. So, Andy, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So the question I had was, you've touched a bunch on this, but if you could just expound a little bit on what you think how the pandemic response and people's awareness of these kinds of issues will change U.S. manufacturing going forward, not just for the next crisis, but just in general. It's giving us new perspectives. So, but also in particular with respect to domestic and global aspects of the question. And you talked a little bit about supply chains, but things like technologies, trade agreements, those kinds of things, how this new perspective will change some of that with respect to manufacturing.
Well, Andy, I look forward to spending some time with you in your new board role with ASME, and thank you as well for your leadership. This is just such a great group to be able to hear from so many special people as well. So I couldn't think of a better way to spend my time. But Andy, I'll answer your question very simply. It's got to come down to listening to the manufacturers. I'm going to tell you something, and know that I uphold the standard as a federal lawmaker, because there's a lot of bills that are getting thrown out there, and sometimes I'm on the bill, sometimes I'm reviewing the bill, sometimes I'm not on it for a reason. But I take really seriously not shooting from the hip in this place, right? How we avoid just saying, oh gosh, it sounds good to say we want to have the reshoring of manufacturing in this country, so let's just do this. And yet it's legislation being crafted in a vacuum that doesn't come with your voice or your input. And when I say you, what the you I am talking about here is the manufacturer. And it gets very interesting when you have the crafting and the approach of legislation that doesn't really come with the deep understanding of complex global supply chains and what the manufacturing community really wants. It's not to say that they don't want the reshoring. Obviously they do. I know you guys do. I mean, this is what our energy and our efforts have all been about, creating our manufacturing workforce, continuing to make and create here at all scales. It's just to do that right. And this is, because the nation is talking about this. Oh my gosh, why didn't we have the PPE here? That should never be the case. And we need to say, let's say that we'll never buy global again. Oh my gosh. I mean, if we start going down that route, what does that mean for our supply chain? What does that mean for procurement? What does that mean when, you've got a European company that you're trying to buy from? Does that mean you can't do it? How do we start readying all these factories and all these making abilities? Do we have the workforce for this? Right. So this is very tricky. It's very interesting. And so, I'm only saying this to all of you because I know you get it. Okay. I couldn't go on I get more words here. This isn't a hashtag, it's nuanced. And so the leadership really comes from all of you. And so as the country is talking about this, here we are on this Zoom, Tom and Debbie Holton, Alex and Andy, and I see Paul's on here, and gosh, we got over 100 people. We are linking arms, right, proverbially, and and I am eager to raise up your voices and bring you to the table as we continue to craft these solutions, because we've got a lot of great opportunity. I mean, look, regional economies, I'm over here, still sometimes feeling like I want to pull my hair out with, the job loss and the setbacks and the lost purchase orders and the slow turn on to everything. I mean, gosh, we got large pieces of equipment that are combustible. I mean, you can't just say, oh, it's been down, get it all back on. We need to sequence with our supply chain. But I think as we move forward here, we've got the energy. And so let's harness the good energy and let's do it right. Let's do the renovations right and the retooling right, so that we can create more manufacturing jobs here and that we can continue to train for the manufacturing workforce of the future. And as you brought up trade, Andy, and negotiate the right trade deals that allow us to compete. As I mentioned, the USMCA, that is our North American competitive framework. That is Buy America. Thank the heavens we got that done. I'll never forget that day for the rest of my life when we voted in that trade deal. It was absolutely remarkable. Each side of the aisle thanking each other, people coming together. I mean, saying, hey, we fix and are starting to address where NAFTA failed us. I mean, for some who have those political sensitivities out of NAFTA, right? They started to say that. So I am excited. I am energized and I'm ready to do this right. And folks, I got my notepad out here. We got standards. We've got, technical applications and approaches that we are going to take to do this right. So Tom, that's cues for us going forward here.
Gotcha.
I think, we're going to be having some long sessions and you guys better believe, and I'll be calling Tom, because if we're getting ready for a big vote or, some hearings and bringing stuff to the floor, I'm going to have ASME and all of you on the speed dial, making sure that this is what we want for our industry leaders, for our training partners, and for our regional economies. Okay.
Thank you. We'll be there. So Congressman, this next is a question. I've seen a theme here from the audience. It's about universities and schools, which, as you know, have been hit hard due to the COVID epidemic. I've had multiple conversations with different team leaders, different presidents, universities. Can you speak a little bit about your knowledge of legislation that will give more financial support on the federal level to our educational institutions?
Yeah, this is infinite here. And I know, especially with education, we are feeling a little bit of the setback, right? We're feeling it because there's state budget shortfalls, there's local revenue budget shortfalls. I've already had some of the hard conversations with my public schools here in Michigan that are some of the best public schools in the country, and they have just such great technical applications. And I say that every time we talk about the education shortfalls, I say it's going to hurt in the classroom, it's going to hurt for technical training, and it's going to hurt on the field. And by the way, we all know that pipeline, right? I mean, just across the street from me practically, I wish they were really across the street, they're a couple miles over, but we got the community college and, they've got to do it in-person training. And so we've got to think about how to do that safely. So, we've got a couple of pieces of legislation with the Relaunching America's Workforce Act. We've got components of the HEROES Act that will help us get in front of that. Even some of the conversations, and this is what's so important with having an event like a global pandemic, we can't forget what existed before the pandemic, right? We can't forget what we were working on and all the progress and the things that we were doing. I was going to mention WIOA and the reauthorization of WIOA and Rebuilding America's Schools Act. So, we've got, we've got a lot to do, but our committees are humming on this, and we've got a few pieces of legislation that, particularly the Relaunching America's Workforce Act, which will invest $15 billion in infrastructure for career and technical education. And, we've done the CTE conversation and in the hearing room before we had to go remote, which was also really important.
That's great. This next question comes from another great contributor to ASME, Bob Hawk. Bob is GE retired healthcare, and he's also chair of ASME's Engineering for Global Development. So Bob, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Congresswoman Stevens, first of all, thanks a lot for meeting with us, and really thanks so much for funding the Congress has allocated critical funding to things like R&D, NIST and NSF. I mean, you guys have been great about that. In spite of the fact that much lower levels, 30 or 40% lower than what you actually allocated was requested by the administration in their budget. And my question is, how can you manage the actual disbursement of the funding that you guys have allocated when the administration seems to want to get in the way? My example du jour is like the World Health Organization. I mean, the WHO, you guys have allocated the funding for that, but now, it doesn't seem to be happening. So how do you manage that?
Yeah. Well, it's so easy to get into the blame game and the finger pointing, particularly when you disagree with an approach. And it's also, the world is sort of black and white sometimes, and you just got to call a spade a spade. I mean, I don't think our renovation strategy should include a decimation strategy. Like, I don't think we need to decimate the relationships and the partnerships and the opportunities to collaborate and lead. I don't know the ins and outs of always being at the global stage, but I will say, and this is, by the way, I'm just having the best morning. Okay, I got to kick off with all the mayors. We do this every Tuesday with one of our counties. And then I got on the phone with the Dean of Engineering from Oakland University. Then I called a good friend over at Automation Alley. And all these guys, these last two conversations are all about advanced manufacturing, right? And now I'm on the Zoom with all of you. And the individual from Automation Alley who I was talking to, this is an association that is focused on the industrial Internet of Things. It's a organization very regional to Michigan, but they have a role in the World Economic Forum. And one of their associates has an opportunity on behalf of the state of Michigan to go and work with the World Economic Forum overseas, I think in partnership with some of the affiliates over at Davos. And, there's funding shortages, and it's like, is she going to be able to do it? And it's got a big budget item and this and that. I mean, it's not an outrageous budget item, but it's a budget item, and there's a lot of cuts. And, she was just saying to me, I mean, this is billions of dollars of potential foreign direct investment and opportunity for our region in our advanced manufacturing space for IIoT. And while that isn't going, if that happens or not, and she's still very optimistic, as am I, that it is going to happen, and she's planning for it, potentially not being able to do it would be a result of, some of these decisions or these budget shortfalls. And I will tell you, Bob, it all trickles from the top, as you know. And the people in charge of this country, who are as our country is designed, we all know how our federal government works. And, I'm so honored to be in the Congress. They make those decisions about, how we choose to collaborate, how we choose to make investments at the global stage. And I very much appreciate you bringing up this question, because it's uncomfortable. And it's sometimes when there's things and they're political and politics and elected offices, just like, like I was in a manufacturing space before I was in Congress. I wasn't asking people, what party are you or who you voting for? I was like, crafting, workforce training programs and doing supply chain engagement. I wasn't really thinking so much about the political. And now it's like, wait a minute, I'm in a political spot. And I've got great friends on all sides of the aisle throughout the Congress. I mean, it's not about that, but it's disappointing, and it's a total break from the past. And what's the past has been this story of our, the industrial coming of America even outside of World War II, right? I mean, there was obviously a big lead up to World War II and why we were able to be successful in World War II. But then there was the consumer activity and this American leadership, and that we brought everyone together, and with all the different global organizations that have continued to come out. I mean, even Richard Nixon, right, folks? And I'm actually committed to studying a little bit more about Nixon in this way, because we were having a hearing about with OSHA and NIOSHA, and these were two organizations that got created under Nixon, as did the EPA. So what was in play then that allowed him as our president to come up with these authorizations, for these new agencies? And we studied this in the Obama administration, because there was a different form of executive authority that Congress gave the president to be able to bring agencies together or create new agencies. I mean, sometimes right now, I think we need some of the efficiency and streamlining. We talk a lot about interagency, but it's been uncomfortable to see this disinvestment. I think, from the philosopher's stone of politics, I think sometimes it's like, well, World War II was a long time ago. I mean, we're right now, I see us in a torch passing moment. We're continuing to uphold our, those World War II veterans who are still with us. And we're also saluting and recognizing those who go, pass on. And who we're saying goodbye to, in some of those send-offs. But when we saw Brexit happen, it was like, why is Brexit happening? This is a break from treaties, right? Why is it? This is a break from how we were doing, from World War II. Well, they took it to a vote, and the people who were voting don't remember why those treaties were signed, right? They don't remember. And so this is going to be, I think, a painful lesson. It's maddening, it's heartbreaking. I think potentially, a different direction, where, and the Congress is going to say, hey, let's rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, because again, we need to be at the table. We don't want to be paying too much. And I do look at that carefully. How do we get a better deal? And, how do we not let folks eat our lunch? But, we're a nation of 300 million people. I mean, talk about strategic international partnerships, U.S.-India strategic partnership. You look at the global framework. I mean, it's got to be the U.S. leading the free world. It has got to be absolutely the U.S. leading the free world, because if it's not the U.S., it's China. And I mean, who wants to live in that world? I mean, but no, thank you. I mean, I know it's a good trading partner on occasion, but they've got a lot of cleanup work to do. I mean, just for good business practices and on and on and on. So, we have got to be leading the free world, but my golly, I don't think we're leading it unless we're at the table. So thank you.
I would agree with you. We need to be at the table. So, Congresswoman, our next question is from another dear friend, a longtime member of ASME, also the Chief Technology Officer at HP Federal, Tommy Gardner. Tommy, good morning. You're on mute, Tommy.
Trying to find the unmute button, Tom. Thank you very much.
There you go, sir. How are you?
Congresswoman, I heard you speak to the Council on Competitiveness a couple of days ago, and very impressed. I really want to support you in any way we can from industry perspective. You get it, and I appreciate that. My question was on standards versus regulations, and what your views are. You have a choice. We can come together as industry and create standards and support those standards, or we can have it regulated from the government or through laws, and there's appropriate times for each, I'm sure. But my concern is for new markets and new directions, such as quantum and AI in the digital world that we exist in as engineers. What are your views of what are the better path to take? Is standard setting in industry better at the start than inserting regulations at the beginning?
Tommy, it's so great to be with you again. And I would just say you can tell we're having so much fun doing Council on Competitiveness and now ASME. So I'm glad that we're together. I didn't know I could have so much fun from my kitchen. So this is a treat. And I really want to commend you for your question. I mean, that is worth like a Wall Street Journal op-ed or even a Harvard Business Review study, and is something I think a lot about in a multitude of ways. Because you mentioned quantum and AI, we can start with that, which is, I'm a big proponent of having the standards come from industry. Look, I'm a federal lawmaker, and I get very sensitive to legislating to other people's lives or the interests of the free market without actually having the people or the free market with you or helping determine what you're legislating. In part, look, I can say I came out from industry and I did all this stuff, but as I move along in this role, and as Tom knows, I'm going for a second term here, right? So you get further and further removed, and I'm one of the good ones, right? Like, I came out of the field, like I could speak the language. In fact, I crave to be back at just the trade events or the different conferences and just absorbing what's going on. But I think with quantum and with AI in particular, it's also representative of being behind technologically and technologically as per the legislation. So you look at it and it's, well, we rely on Congress to spend on the R&D. Sometimes there's a need for maybe, some legislation, but yet we don't know exactly the implications of it, or we don't know if it should be permanent legislation. So one of the endeavors, and Tommy, maybe we can do this with the council and ASME, is the sunset provisions, to say, okay, if it's coming from industry and it's coming from all the partners, and we're saying, hey, we need to legislate to this consideration. We know Moore's law. We know things change very rapidly and very quickly. Maybe we do a series of sunset clauses, where it's, hey, this is, we do this a lot, right? It's a reauthorization. Hey, it's up for reauthorization every 2 years. If we want to reauthorize it and it's still making sense, great. That's, and I'm being intentionally sort of laissez-faire with my or a little vague with what I would consider legislating to in that space, because we don't necessarily know. I mean, I think we can look at social media and some of the regulations on social media as, that we maybe should have done more earlier, and we're a little behind now. And, there's some questions around governance and things along those lines. But another more tangible example, Tommy, is what we saw with this pandemic. So as Tom mentioned in my intro, I was in the Department of Treasury during the Great Recession. I was working on the auto rescue, and it was like every day it was like going into work with like a cup of water trying to put out a fire. I mean, it was just such a big project, and we put it together in the right way, and we were ultimately successful. And by the way, again, it was bipartisan. It was started with Bush. The Bush appointees stayed in the Treasury Department to work alongside the Obama appointees. And we got this done together, and no one even cared who was who. It was really, really remarkable. It was one of the untold stories. But all I had to do on March 12th of 2020 was close my eyes, right? And feel like I was back at the Treasury Department with another economic crisis, right? And instead I opened my eyes, I'm in the Congress. And I told my chief of staff, I said, we're gonna make a couple of calls. These are our first calls we're making in this dynamic. You're going to call the insurers. Okay. Yeah. You deal with the insurer. You just call the insurers. Let's, kind of an uninsurable event, but let's just check here. Right. And, we've seen this post 9/11 with TRIA and the type of insurance for, terrorist attacks and things along those lines, and the great loss. And I'm sure we'll see that in this pandemic environment. There's no even business interruption insurance for this. I'm going to call the grocers. My first call was to the grocers. Well, of course I call my manufacturers too, but my non-manufacturing call was to my grocers. And I call the grocers because all of a sudden they're an essential business, right? And it's like our hospitals are used to working in triage environments, but our grocers, not that it's per se, medical triage, but oh my gosh, the grocery store is all of a sudden the most intense space in the community. You know, oh, we got to go in. Are the employees going to be safe? Are the customers going to feel safe? And I made the calls to the corporate government affairs office and to the employees. And I just asked, I said, are you guys getting what you need? And they were, this is a good story, Tommy. They were doing it themselves. They were putting it together themselves. They knew they had my support, the support. I mean, the state was sort of governing in the way that they have to, as you know, they were dubbing them as essential, but continuing to say, I want to be a steady partner for you. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't want to tell you what you have to do. I'm happy to get you the information. So I was a week and a half later driving back. I drove, right? It's this, you know, height of this new environment we're living in. We had to get back to Washington to vote on the CARES Act, and I decided to drive. Luckily, my fiance said, you're not going to drive alone, I'll drive you. He's in the driver's seat, I'm in the passengers, working. And I'm doing two things. One, I'm drafting a letter about our city's funding, and two, I am drafting a letter to the agency leads, the cabinet secretary, saying, food for thought, you might want to consider creating an interagency task force specifically dedicated to health guidelines, not requirements, not regulations, but vis-a-vis the Department of Labor working alongside the CDC and the FDA and OSHA and NIOSHA or whatever, although those are a little bit more regulated. So I just really said CDC and FDA, and just sharing real-time information. Because the uncertainty, right, was so high and people were looking for information. I thought, this is, you know, a lot of times these interagency task forces, and I said, hey, we did this during the auto rescue, we did this during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, but they provide a peace of mind for people. We're not here to tell companies what to do or employees what to do, because we know that you're coming together to do that as essential businesses. So you didn't ask the COVID question, but that's a kind of a good example in an intense and you know, kind of uncertain environment. And I think with quantum and AI, you know, I'm going to tell you what, and invite me to the next session. I am so eager to soak up as much as I can in the quantum space. I mean, it's so exciting. I mean, I do Manufacturing Monday, by the way, in my district. It's an amazing thing. I go and I see the companies and I meet the workers and I get to geek out with the technology, but also hear what's on everyone's mind, particularly right from my suppliers, you know, and I sometimes do our training centers as well. What do you need from the federal government? Great if they don't need anything. I mean, that's, you know, if they're like, hey, we just want to show off and have you have an awareness. You know, a lot of times it was trade, some of the workforce considerations, but, you know, quantum keeps coming up, Tommy. It's everywhere. It's where the industries leaders are moving, and Congress, right, needs to be educated. You know, Congress, and here I am, I've done a lot of talking. We do a lot of talking in this job, and people deserve to hear from us and hear what's on our mind and hear what's going on in the Congress and what we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue to have, I mean, we got a whole plethora of work here. But before we're so quick to do regulations, we need to continue to empower our standards body and the education of our lawmakers so we get the best outcomes for everybody. And I'll just conclude on that my job is to produce the best results for the most amount of people in any given time with the laws that we pass. Golden question. I wrote it down.
Well, Congresswoman, thank you. We're just about out of time. I want to be respectful of our 12 o'clock hard stop. We've got a bunch of questions. I also want to thank our audience for participating. We'll definitely need to do this again. This is our first inaugural kickoff, so thank you.